Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. At the intersection of comics and social change, this is your host, Ilana Levin, and this is a comics podcast. This is the comics podcast for folks who love a good heist story, and even better when everyone is queer and it's right on your phone. That's right, I've got writer and artist Emmett Hobbes on to talk about his first new series on the Webtoons comics app. It's called Royale, the Prussian Blue. When white hat thieves Royale and Damascus were hired to steal the Prussian Blue from the world's most powerful art trader, they didn't expect to run into competition. With new foes, mysterious forces, and a political catastrophe on the horizon, this might be their toughest job yet, if they survive. I'm really excited to read the series. I've loved everything I've seen so far. And here's a bit about Emmett. Emmett has been making comics since he was 6 years old. He drew that girl punk graphic novel, My Riot, which was written by Rick Spears and came out in 2020. He also drew half of Rick and Morty, Ever After, with Sarah Stern, which was written by Sam Maggs. In fact, he's done lots of Rick and Morty in general. He's contributed short pieces to the first Sweaty Palms anthology and Oh Joy Sex Toy. Royale is his first full-length series as writer and artist. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much.
I'm really excited to have you on for this. I've been following you on social media for a while. I don't even know initially how we encountered each other, but I've loved seeing all the progress art you've been posting for other projects. And then this one, and I was like, oh, I need to have you on the show. And you were like, well, I have to have something that, I want things to be farther along when you talk. And then out of the blue, Suddenly it was like, bam, there's this Webtoon series.
Yep, out of the blue.
I know that it's not actually that way because you've been working on it forever because that's the nature of a project. But I was like, oh, a new thing. Exciting.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
Well, the funny thing about that is that it was sprung on us. We somehow didn't get told when our release date would be. And so I didn't know until the day of that it was dropping. So it was a surprise to us as well.
Oh, wow. Well, how does one get started doing a series on Webtoons? I actually was like really not familiar with the app, even though I know it's hugely popular. Like, how does it all work?
Yeah, I didn't know much about it either going into it, but it's there's two ways to do a Webtoon. There's Webtoon Canvas, which is all like self-published webcomics. You're not beholden to a schedule or any kind of metrics or anything, and you do it on your own time. Or there's Webtoon Originals, which is more of like a classic contracted publisher approach where you're given sort of an advance on your work, and then you get a portion of ad revenue sales as well. But that's like way stricter. You have an editor and all that.
So it's like a publisher. It just happens to be going up online.
Right. I got into that because a colleague who is the writer of Urban Animal, which is another big one they've had going for a while. I had just asked him about what his experience was like because I was curious. And he was just like, okay, we'll put a pitch together and I'll put it in front of my editor. And we did that and pitched. And after one revision, we were greenlit. So it happened really fast.
That's awesome. It. What I love is that, this is a platform that has a lot of sort of, manga work on it, but not exclusively. And I think, this looks like maybe this is part of diversifying the kind of content that they have.
Absolutely. Something that they told us right away was that they wanted to expand into like a different audience. And that Royale was kind of part of that plan. And I see it because, you're right. There's, it's a Korean app originally. And so, when they made like the, Western or English language version of the app, they carried a lot of those titles over. And so there's, a very like East Asian foundation of comics there, and Royale definitely has like some anime and manga influences to it, but it's pretty Western. It's like Tintin. It's set in Europe, so, and I think it's definitely, I would say it's more boyish. Like it feels more, it's like grimy and weird, and it's not very glamorous or pretty.
Well, I love the aesthetics of it, though. I mean, I'm definitely someone who I need the art to look like something I like, or else it's really hard for me to make myself read it, which is not to say that I haven't dragged myself through some fucking Greg Land illustrated superhero books before, because they have saddled awesome writers with the tracer of vivid video porn. But but on balance, it's so much better when I love the whole package. And I do hear, and you're doing the art, you're doing the writing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is. And it's, this is sort of this vertical scroll format, like that's got to be a different approach for you as an artist. And I can see how it's designed for it,
Yeah, well, that's really cool of you to notice, because that was, I think that's what really attracted me to the platform. Was I have like a problem solver brain. I just like to find problems. I like to seek out problems or create problems and then solve them. And so, I really like comics, and I was just really curious about how moving from, a left to right, panels on a page, pages in a book format, like how it would be to go from that to an infinite scroll where there's no pages and like just way more, literally infinite room.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard. I could talk about that for hours and hours though, so I won't. But yeah, it was a very scientific process for me. I have like all of these notes and stuff where I was breaking down the physics of how it changes the eye line and how you have to have different shot choices, and that sometimes the rules are opposite from what they are in paper comics. But
well, I'm very happy to keep geeking out on that kind of thing, but I do want to give my listeners a little bit more background, because they might not have read the series yet, in like what the it is. But I love talking about form too. So yeah, this is a heist story, which is a genre I really love. And I can definitely see how it lends itself to this kind of structure as well, especially because like you can binge it really easily. And then there's just like suspense of like, okay, if you're going to see the next one, you got to buy 5 coin. I'm like, take my money. Yeah. I have to see the next installment. But yeah, like what's your connection to the heist genre? Like, how did you get into that?
Well, and I haven't like done much professional writing yet, and so people don't really know what I'm interested in, but typically I really like this genre heavy stuff that's about crime. And I actually grew up not really having access to those kinds of movies because I had a very sort of conservative upbringing that had a really strong throttle on media intake. And so I missed out on a lot of that stuff. But as an adult, it's started really appealing to me. I really like working in genre. I think it's a great way to kind of normalize things by just showing different people doing the same stuff we've been doing in media for decades.
Yeah.
And I think crime is just fun. I love people who misbehave, and I love people who are messy and who create problems for themselves. And it's just a great platform for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you mentioned you have a problem solver brain, and I'm like, yep, that goes along with the heist structure. But for me, it's like, there's a reason I don't read a ton of Webtoons type stuff, which is often that, like, as much as I really need my soap opera to be part of the story, because I'm all about the character relationships. I'm not like a coffee shop story or high school story. Like, it's not as interesting to me usually. Like, I really like genre as well. It's great to see a queer, diverse cast in a sexy, exciting setting, like playing in a dynamic genre it's definitely emotional, and there's feelings and there's character in the soap opera, but it's also not just, I don't know, it's just like some sad gays in a corner or something,
I know what you mean. And I like that, those coffee shop slice of life comics too. But I think that what really excited me about the vertical strip format is that, like, the being able to draw like action scenes in that format was a really exciting idea to me, because there's just so much more freedom. And so that I actually totally wrote Royale with the vertical strip format in mind. Like every kind of thing that's in there, I was like, all right, I'm going to be able to take, like totally exploit the medium or the format. Even down to like, we chose the color blue because it's really hard to print that vibrant of a blue in comics, and Hank, the colorist, would have never been able to use it otherwise.
That's so cool. Yeah, it is really glowing off the page.
Yeah, it's quite a color.
I started reading the series later at night than I probably should have, and I'm definitely feeling like the vividness was like keeping my eyes up on the screen, and the intensity.
Yeah. There was a comment that we saw that was like, the colors are so bright, they blinded me. It was great.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a moment where you have a character sort of take off their glasses and do a Jedi mind trick, as it were,
Hmm.
on someone, and like the frame is like shake. I mean, you got me dizzy looking at this
Oh, sweet.
with the registration, and that's like, yeah, I think it works better on the screen. I don't know how that would have worked on a
Yep.
printed page.
There's something about it. I think part of it is that you're physically moving the pieces as well, and so you get this like split second visual ambiguity, or like, a kind of a motion blur in your eyes that makes things feel like they're moving for a second. And so you can, take advantage of that to confuse people.
Yeah, yeah. It was like, whoa, my brain. I just looked at it again now, and I'm like, it still works. Like, even if you know it's coming, it still works.
That's cool.
What are some of your favorite heist stories and inspirations here?
So this is so funny. My boyfriend actually asked me this question last night about what research I did into the heist genre for Royale, and I realized that I didn't do very much, and that's because although the story is a heist, it's formatted more like a mystery, like a serialized drama TV show, and so that's kind of more what I looked into. Of course, there's a heavy Lupin the Third. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
There's a heavy Lupin the Third influence in there. I think that's where it started. I was like, I want this, but more explicitly gay and with the things that I like.
Yes, exactly. I've seen one of those movies, and that was that was really my only exposure to it. But I definitely get it. And the European setting, and it's sort of also like it's like sort of timeless and out of time as well.
Yeah, and that's a quality that we've really sought for in Royale too, and I don't think it's super obvious yet, but as we get into the world, it's kind of looks like 1970s inspired, but the technology is a little ambiguous, and I really liked that quality in fiction. I think it lends itself really well to a kind of episodic legacy, that, because, if I did a sequel or something, I don't have to set it in the same time period. I can choose a completely different aesthetic because it was never grounded in the first place.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. One of the things that's really clear here, and that I've seen in other work that you've kind of teased on social media, is you really have a great passion for character design and a really great skill with it. How did you approach developing the central cast for this?
So character design for me, weirdly, is never a really intentional process. It's like I just get an idea for something and then draw it and then kind of fine tune it later. But Royale came about because I was like the character Royale, who is the protagonist. He came about because I was kind of like in this weird period with my career where I wasn't sure what I liked and wanted to do, and so I was doing a lot of these sort of character design exercises, and there was one floating around that was like, take 9 characters that you love and then just design a new character based off of all of their qualities. And so I came up with this guy that looked kind of like grumpy and small and rascally a little bit. I was like, I like that. I'm going to run with that idea. And I mean, I have a Patreon, which I'm setting up. Again, like our launch was kind of sprung on us, so I'm not prepared, but I will have a Patreon set up soon with some behind the scenes stuff where I show some of the early character designs and how similar they are to the final and how they changed. So I don't really do a ton of work in character design. It just happens. I wish I had a more interesting answer for you.
No, I mean, I've seen you also do like really good sort of character mock-up sheets for I'm so sorry. What is the name of the not yet released or announced, but
The End of Baz Arcadian.
Yes. I've seen you do really great sort of like character sheets and descriptions for those folks too. So and you have that classic opening here too, where it's got like this is the character's name, the couple things you need to know, like freeze frame of them in action.
Yeah, I when I do character studies, it feels more like, and this is so pretentious, but it feels more like getting to know the character rather than coming up with them. Because I'm just, you've probably seen some of the like Baz Arcadian stuff that is like a bunch of characters or like one character on one sheet doing a bunch of different mundane things. And that's kind of how I approach it is I want to see how the character acts under normal circumstances. And I think that helps provide a really good foundation to figure out how they react when those circumstances are dramatically shifted. And it just, then the story kind of writes itself from there, you know, like if you know what decision these characters are going to make and how they work with one another, it just kind of falls into place.
That's neat. I'm really enjoying the relationship between the two main characters that we have so far. I didn't quite realize we'd be getting right into Damascus so quickly in the story structure. That was kind of neat because it sort of is this change from this like dashing solo protagonist or whatever, or, you know, to actually be more about a team.
Yeah. So that was kind of a surprise for me too when I went into writing it because yeah, like I think if you really analyze those first couple episodes, Damascus is absolutely like an accessory that is there to get exposition from our skilled and, like you said, dashing solo protagonist. But, you know, I got fascinated with their character really quickly, and they are a really interesting character that comes out in layers as the story goes on. And it just, you know, that's sort of I don't know if probably you're familiar with like Captain Easy and like, you know, the Indiana Jones format where we have this skilled protagonist that kind of swoops in and then something exciting happens around them and then they leave. But it's always like the guest characters that are more interesting. And I've always really liked that format. So yeah, like Royale's name is in the title because he's kind of the instigator. But really the story is about how everyone around this, you know, this murder and the theft and all of this grand intrigue. Yeah.
I also love how like there's so many stories where you have characters try to not be seen or trailing someone, but they have these very iconic looks and styles. And it's like never actually works against them. I remember, I remember my dad saying this when we were watching The French Connection. And even though I don't remember seeing it with my dad, but my dad saying something like, of course they can see you're trailing them because Popeye's the only man wearing a hat. It's the 70s. And you're like, oh my God, that's true. He is the only man wearing a hat because it's the 70s. That seems like you would spot him pretty easily. You actually play into the like, oh, he's a neat little outfit. And then you're like, suspect is wearing a brown suit with a bright orange necktie. Oh, hey.
Yeah. I just thought that was funny. I like the idea of, I mean, Royale as a character, he's a skin of his teeth kind of guy. Like everything, he's totally reactionary. He doesn't plan. He just jumps in and he's never had to, you know, he just always cleans up his own problems. So he's never had to plan anything. And that's why Damascus worked so well, I think, against him because they are much more methodical. It's mentioned in the first couple episodes that they were private eye. And so they are much more about gathering information and Royale is acting. So they play off each other, I think, really well.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Royale's just dumb.
Well, it's gotten him this far, although
exactly.
We do sort of see where it ends, or some of it perhaps ends in the very beginning.
Yeah.
What's behind sort of like starting? I mean, that's the thing. It's interesting. It's like I want to say like, oh, this sort of starts at the end of the story with someone in court, but it doesn't actually mean that that's actually the ending. I can totally see that being a fake out in certain ways. So.
Oh yeah. So I mean, if you look at it, it does start out saying, okay, this happened, and then 1 year later in Berlin. So it's more like a prologue than it is like an in media res thing. Sort of. You'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other things I love about the characters is how thoughtful you are about fashion and clothing, but also sort of a diversity of body types and like form for them. So it's not just, there is absolutely zero same face happening in this. And there's also like zero same body. And so many artists are like, oh, I don't know how to draw fat people, or I don't know how to draw people who are really skinny. I'm like, really? I think you kind of made a choice.
So
you've made the other choice.
I can provide some nuance for that because, yes, absolutely, people should be drawing more fat people and people of different bodies in their work. But with Webtoon especially, there's this whole, people have to draw these Webtoons really, really, really fast. And so a lot of them rely on things like 3D models or, pre-made poses that are overwhelmingly skinny people. And it, that's not excusing it, of course, but that's where it comes from, is that it is either, an inability or an unwillingness to do a little bit of extra work for that. Not to say that it is extra work, but, it's something that I enjoy doing. And so it's definitely, made the process take longer because I can't use those resources. But I really like drawing different bodies. I think that even just practically as a character designer, it makes a lot of sense because that gives you unique silhouettes that are easy to spot from far away. You get more of a feeling of like form and weight, when people all kind of look different and interact with the environment differently. It gives your story so much to lean into diversifying at all, but I think especially along physical lines.
And also clothing. You're very thoughtful about it, and there's some great outfits. How do you design?
So Royale and Damascus, I hired a costume designer for these first few episodes because at the time, which was like 2 years ago, is when I drew those first 3. And then we took a big break so I could write it, and then we came back to it. But I hired someone because I just really was not confident in my ability to design clothes. And I just started studying, and now it's like a whole part of my personality. So that was really fun. But I'm curious to hear like what you see in the clothes that is so striking to you. Like, why is it, if that makes sense?
I love a good suit. And you have a few different ones. Like, you actually are like, okay, one of your characters is got it very much reminds me of Bowie's suit from the Young Americans era, which is like the striking blue, and it's got the pleat front pants, which is the kind of thing that either like really works on somebody or really doesn't. And it definitely really works on this character. I mean, like the whole look, including with their hair. I mean, their hair is like orange, which is definitely not Bowie's hair in that moment, but is a throwback to Bowie hair of an earlier period of time. So like, definitely see the visual influence there. Love the embroidery on Damascus with like this really sort of 80s culture club hat situation. And but then you have more 70s-ness really in Royale's outfit, like there's a thoughtfulness to the tailoring and to the shoe choices, the shoe silhouettes even.
Yeah.
Like,
so that was mostly Erik, who was our designer for this first round of costumes. And but he worked off of a Pinterest board that I put together. So it was, collaborative, but Erik definitely was the one who designated the tailoring, because that was something that really eluded me at the time, as I like couldn't figure out how to draw different kinds and fits of suits. So having something to draw off of, like to reference, that was specific to the character helped a lot. And in those 2 years since we started, I think that you can notice, like from episode 3 to 4, there's so much more of an understanding of like drapery and how fabric moves in space, which is great because that's the first fight scene. I think if I didn't understand the physics of clothing, it wouldn't have turned out so nice.
Yeah. But, and you can see there's like a world of difference between, like Erik, the superintendent's pleated pants, and the mysterious stranger's pleated pants. Like, it's not even doing the same thing,
Yeah, because we've got like grandpa pleated pants, and then we have, again, like 80s.
High fashion pleated pants. And it's really cool. I don't know how much you want to go there. So tell me if you're like, no, but there was a thread on Twitter where people were debating different approaches to drawing trans characters in your art with body types and styles.
Okay.
And if this is something that you're cool to talk, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of the original thread, but I think it,
Yes. So I have a very sort of like, I've come to a very nuanced conclusion about that. I'm comfortable talking about it,
Go for it.
and I
Thank
think
you.
it would be fun and interesting. Yeah, it's sensitive because when you go into it, you don't want to be referencing stereotypes or unintentionally, kind of try to misgender somebody by, adding anyway. Yeah, it's a whole mess. But I find that for me, I just trust my gut with it. I think of people that I know in real life, and Damascus is a really important character to me along those lines because they are trans feminine and non-binary and do very little to try to pass. And, that's sort of been my relationship with my transition as well, is that I, have done the things that make me feel good and, trying to not think about how I look or whatever, it means that sometimes people don't gender me correctly, but it doesn't matter because I'm for me. Anyway, that's totally tangential, but yeah, it's definitely something that I figure into my work. Even as trans people, we're not exempt from that internalized stuff. So, I think it's for people who are transitioning sort of along the binary from quote unquote one side to the other, I think it's important for us to really question if we idealize cisgender bodies. You know what I mean? When we're drawing characters, I know that so much of it is just, projection and fantasizing, but it's really, I think it's good and constructive to have a variety of bodies, whether or not they quote unquote pass or not. And, I think again, it's just a problem of not having enough characters in the mix and not having enough diversity because there's no one correct or incorrect way to draw a trans person. But if you draw them the same way every time and they just look cisgender, then, I don't know if that's coming from a good place. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like there's this like thread of seeing so many people do a bad job with certain kinds of representation, trying to correct it by putting together like, look, here's how I approach it. But then it can be kind of reductive when, frankly, so much of the answer is you all need to do more work. And more work includes more research and talking and looking and studying people and conversations and more representation. And it can't just be fixed by like, here's your guide to this, that, or the other.
Right. I think personally what happened with that was that that's great material to present at like a sensitivity meeting kind of thing. Privately, like to a company that knows they need to work on this stuff and they're going to sit and take notes. Putting it out publicly, I think, was immensely triggering for a lot of transgender people. And so, when you are triggered, you feel attacked. And it's really hard to ground around that and understand like what the intention was. And it just really hurts. And I definitely, when I was looking at the slides, it made me really uncomfortable. It made me feel self-conscious. Because I was like, oh, okay, I would, you're evaluating yourself along those lines. So I think that the material is good because it's correct. There are differences in different bodies along the hormone spectrum, but I think it was, sort of maybe inappropriate to blast it out like that. And especially the way that some of the original tweets were formatted is it just showed the drawings out of context.
Oh boy, that's never doing anybody any favors.
Yeah, so I think that it was more of an issue with the release of it than the actual material. And people might disagree with me on that, and that's totally fine. That's just, personally how it affected me and how I've come to terms with its existence.
Gotcha. Yeah. You mentioned like for like a company to have an internal presentation and I'm like, wouldn't that be the day? Like,
right.
Well, having intentionality.
Never.
A friend of mine who was on the show a while back, Desiree Rodriguez was like, she was doing some line editing for Lion Forge. And she was like, hey guys, what if in order to keep us from whitewashing skin tones, we had permanent color guides for our characters. And people were like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, please, other publishers do this. Please, other publishers do this. I don't think any other publisher's done that. It's like, like you can have internal things set up to try to address some of these things, but there's just there's a lack of will in a lot of places still, unfortunately.
Yeah. That just makes so much sense to me, to have skin tone guides, or just to have color guides. I mean, you have color guides for branding colors, costume colors. I think that other, all of the colors should probably be in there. Eye color, hair color, everything.
Yeah, color palettes. And you do such an interesting job of dealing with different skin colors responding to different colors of lighting and atmosphere around them. Like, you have a lot of complicated colors on top of colors happening with rendering characters of color here.
Yeah, so that's Hank Jones is our colorist, and that is all him.
When you're working digitally, how does a colorist work with digital art, I guess?
I just make the line work, and then I hand him the layered file. He goes in there and, Photoshop or Clip Studio, I think is what he uses, and colors underneath it. But something we started doing in the later episodes, like maybe after 7 or so, is I stop drawing backgrounds and I start just painting them in blocks of color instead. And so for those ones, I do lay down the value. So they're in grayscale from, the things that are supposed to be dark are dark and the things that are supposed to be light are light. And Hank chooses the palette for that. And then that also helps him determine kind of like where the light is coming from. But he is incredible with light. And that's why, I was really excited to have him on this project, is because it's about a painting that glows. Light is really important. And, you'll notice as the series goes on, that, every scene he chooses such an intentional palette that has, temperature and atmosphere to it. Like, you can feel the quality of the air, if it's, dank in a basement, or if it's like, cloudy outside and misty and rainy. Yeah, I would really invite people to look deep into the color, because I think that's kind of an overlooked part of the craft in comics creation. It's still kind of, in some circles, thought of as a technical thing. But I mean, apart from just saying, this character has like this skin tone and this hair color and likes these colors to wear, everything else is him. So, but yeah, he's really good with light and how it interacts with different materials.
That's really beautiful and pays off. And
yeah,
love having some of the specialization from folks who really know how to do it. So,
I love collaboration. That's like, I was trying to get into film before I got into comics, and then I fell in love with comics and I like them more now. But that was one of the things that really attracts me to production in general, is just having a lot of different people who are putting all of their strengths together to make something that's just like, unimaginable to an individual. So yeah, we don't get paid a ton in comics, and that's kind of, not a secret. And, there's not a ton to go around, but like, I think that we get so much better work through working with each other than I would just on my own. Absolutely. So
how did you said you were making comics since you were 6. How did you get into the comics medium, and like what brought you interested when you were 6?
Yeah. So I didn't have any comic book people in my family at all. Like I said, media was kind of throttled. So like, we were superhero comics and stuff we didn't really have around, but we did have the Sunday newspaper. And so every Sunday I read the comic strips on the back of the paper, and I just fell in love with them. I don't know what it was. I was so drawn to it, and I, read all of them every week, and I just had started drawing my own. And I think the first time that I was really like, I thought that I was going to get serious about it was when my mom was reading my brother Captain Underpants, which had just come out then for the first time. It's had like a comeback now, but in that story, there are 2 boys, George and Harold, who are in like, 3rd grade or something, maybe 4th grade, and they make comics together. And that was the first time that I had ever seen a child making a comic book.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, crap, I can do that. Okay, cool. And so I, with my friends had started making comics and trading them and doing that stereotypical thing. And I just went from there. Got into manga around middle school when I really wanted more complex stories and themes. And then kind of got more into the, European stuff, Franco-Belgian, and then graphic novels, more into like college and adulthood.
What are some of the works that you really love?
One of my longtime favorites is Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley. That's one that I always have on my bookshelf and I kind of like treasure with my life. I won't lend it to anybody, which is rare. And I think it's because the story is the art style is, Brian Lee O'Malley. It's very cutesy. But the story really brought me to tears. Like it's just really complex emotionally, and it has to do with regret and growing up. Not from a teenager's point of view, but from an adult's point of view. And, I probably read it when I was like 22 or something. And, the character just kind of goes from being this self-absorbed jerk to, trying to figure out how to live their life sustainably. And it just really struck me emotionally. So I have that one around a lot. Lupin the Third, of course, like Monkey Punch stuff, which has not aged well. I will preface, the books have not aged well at all. But the cartooning is great. Yeah, I mean, I have kind of a, rotating stuff that I like. I'll always read Hellblazer, Preacher, and just, Dylan's drawing in general has been pretty influential. But it's like all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely see like Hellblazer influence through a lot of the work.
Yeah, and the next thing I'm doing is very Hellblazer.
Wait, can you tell us about it?
We're working on it. We're gonna get it printed. We're gonna get it published. But I can't really say much more beyond that, except that I continue to write and draw and have a big Word document full of jokes that I have to figure out how to, weave into the story so that it's funny. But that one's going to be, so it's called The End of Baz Arcadian. And that one's for a little bit more mature of an audience. And it's definitely more Hellblazer. It's grosser. It's got more sex in it. It's just like filthy.
That's great. There's definitely a space and need for that.
Yeah. Me, I need it.
That's certainly a driver between art is like this thing that I wish existed. I guess I have to fucking make it, don't I?
Exactly. Like, okay, well, if you want something done well, you might as well do it yourself.
Yeah. And I've just seen this piece sort of being in development and snippets of it on social media, and it looks like it's going to be really fabulous. So
I really hope so. Thank you. Yeah. I just try to have fun with whatever I'm doing and try not to worry about it being good or not.
That's what editors are for anyway. So
right, exactly. And that's why I don't self-publish, to be totally honest, is I don't do well without being on a leash of some kind. I need someone to be like, that's not actually a good idea, Emmett. That's a really stupid idea and it's not funny. And you should do something else. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, also for me, it's just sort of like I have too many ideas and I want someone to help me trim stuff down. Like I love handing in an essay or a review or something to an editor. And I'm like, I know this is too long for anybody to read it.
Yes.
Please help me get this down to a size where I can have more people read my work because I care about that.
Yes. Yeah, I process information very verbally, and so the first draft I write of anything is just every single word that pops into my head about it. And it takes a lot of trimming down to find the brevity in there.
Yeah. I think I was talking with Kieran Gillen just like Monday, and he was saying he thinks he writes twice as much as he needs to for any given project, basically.
Oh yeah. God, yeah. I think that's normal with writers because I think we need to write in order to understand things. And so we have to write it until we understand it, and then we can move forward and, present it in a format that is comprehensible to another human being.
And a heist story is like, you have to have it lean enough to be able to build tension. And at least I think like maybe those things aren't interrelated. I don't know, but that definitely seems like a hard piece of it to me.
Yeah, writing a mystery is really, really hard. And I, at some point in my life, was like, I'm never going to write a mystery. That's too hard. And then I did it. I think I'd wanted to do it because it's hard, but you're absolutely right. Like, there is so little fluff in any of this story stuff. Every piece of dialogue is there for a specific reason, whether it relates to a plot thing coming down the line, or if it's like foreshadowing, or if we're learning a really important detail about the character. Every shot and piece of word that's in there and expression is just like dead on intentional. At least I intended it to be intentional. But yeah, I think that people lock onto that, and I think that it's a really good quality to have in a mystery because, once you start to build this rapport with the reader, that they understand that everything is important, they pay better attention and get more engaged with it because they know that, you're respecting their time. So, yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah. I feel like I'm happen to be making an attempt to write something that isn't a critical essay. Oh my God, shocking. That I would love for it to function as a heist story, and building the tension around that and like having that sort of drive the action is the hardest piece of it for me.
Yeah,
the character stuff is really easy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can sit here and write characters talking for hours and hours.
Yeah.
I think that the Webtoon format kind of forced me into figuring that out because it's a weekly update schedule. You kind of have to plant cliffhangers of some kind at the end of every episode to try to get people to come back next week. And so it really just forced me into this rhythm of like build tension and cut. And then, next episode, resolve tension, build tension, cut. And you just kind of get in that ebb and flow of things. And it really naturally, I think, helps pace.
Do you come into it saying, I know what the answer needs to be and the challenges that he's going to have to, or that the characters are going to have to overcome to win, or?
Yeah. I have pretty much the whole story put out into beats, kind of like key moments. But I write the script as I go because the characters change, and their motivations become more clear as you go along. But yeah, all of the specific challenges, the things that the characters have to overcome, there's like an incredible, I think anyway, to me, it seems like an insane amount of like tactical planning on my end for all of this stuff. But like you said, like, I think you need that in a mystery to keep people hooked. Yeah.
I happen to notice you wrote on Twitter at some point, you're like, please let me tell you about Preacher. And I was like, like in general, like, which I relate to, because like I had this moment this winter, I was like, I have my own comics and pop culture content podcast, but nobody invites me on their show to talk about music. Please let me talk at you about music. And then thankfully, the wonderful folks at Is It Camp were like, hey, our podcast isn't necessarily about music, but you can talk about music on our podcast. I was like, okay, can we talk about David Lee Roth and Van Halen and how that's completely camp? And they're like, yes. I'm like, great. So I'm like, okay, can I be for you? Like, it's funny because I'm not a big Preacher person. I'm like, okay, but like, you're like, you want to tell people about Preacher. Like, tell me about Preacher,
So, this is going to damage my credibility, but I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't grow up on American comics like at all. That was kind of my last thing that I got into. And so, or I guess you could debate if Preacher is an American. It feels American to me in spirit. But yeah, so I was like, all right. And for preparing for Baz Arcadian, the next thing I'm working on, I really needed to get into that canon of dude comics from the 80s and 90s. And, so Preacher, of course, was on that list. And I had watched the TV show and really enjoyed it. And my expectation going into the series was that it wasn't going to age well. And there's a lot of ways it doesn't. But it was so more infinitely layered and fascinating to me, especially as a piece from the lens of like American masculinity, in the generation of men coming after the Vietnam War, and how the trauma from that, was passed down to create this like version of masculinity that was really cruel and, physical and survival oriented in a way that it totally doesn't need to be. But that is just woven into this book, and the characters ask so many questions about this kind of stuff. There's a whole arc where Jesse Custer, things are getting serious and he's worried about his girlfriend, Tulip, who's an amazing character. I think way more compelling in the book than in the show, which is wild because I love Ruth Negga and she did amazingly. But the casting was amazing and the actors were incredible, but I think that they really lost a lot in translation. But anyway, yeah, so, yeah, so Jesse's worried about his girlfriend, Tulip, but she's like a badass, she can handle herself. She has a gun. She's cool. But, he's like, I don't know what it is. Like men, we just feel like we have to protect women. And he's like, I know you can handle yourself, but if something happened to you, like I would die. And I thought that was, especially for the time period and for the brand of masculinity, this like John Wayne-esque stuff that's attached to this book, I felt that was an incredibly profound insight that he, for one, he feels this way, this really intense, visceral way about protecting this person he loves. He understands that it's not coming from a place of logic because he knows she can handle herself. But he also understands that it would destroy him to lose her, and that he is making a choice to accommodate himself emotionally in that way. And whether or not that's actually healthy is debatable, because it drives them apart, and she, doesn't leave him alone anyway. She gets involved anyway. But it's just, the series is just riddled with little moments like that, of just a couple pages long of characters saying a lot of like really stuff that, it makes me think of a 24-year-old like staring at the stars, like trying to figure out what the meaning to life is. It's that kind of vibe of just like thinking a lot about the universe and your place in it, and why humans seem to be so smart, but we make such brainless decisions sometimes. And that's really what has stuck with me. And yeah, it's just really juicy when you're looking at masculinity and how trauma has informed what we call toxic masculinity. As a transgender man, like, it has been really healing, I think, for me to read, because you're seeing where this is coming from, like this legacy of masculinity. And it was healing to read, I think. Because I've known men like Jesse Custer in real life, and they're not pleasant to be around, and they're horrible. No. And that's the kind of masculinity that my dad, who is not like that. My dad is a very gentle man, and he's very generous and very tender and sweet. But that's the kind of masculinity that he grew up with, that he idealized. And so, but it ended with me because I was not born, quote, as a boy. So I got to skip all that programming, and I get to look at it from the other side. So it's been really valuable to me. And, in creating more stories for men that are coming from genres dominated by men, I think that's really important to go through that and just understand, like, where some of these tropes or archetypes are coming from, and how to, dissect them in a way that's like interesting and adds something to the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like, to an extent, being a queer person means that you spend more time thinking about gender than a lot of street. And it's like unfathomable. Like, I don't know. It's one of those, like, how do people have unexamined lives in these ways is confusing I just don't understand. And, I definitely know that there's periods of time where I might think, more or less about it, and certainly be periods of time where you're just like, please don't look at me. That would be irritating. But to not be considering these things is a strange.
Yeah. Yeah, I pretty regularly have the epiphany that like people really are out here spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a movie and not thinking about how it affects the world.
Right.
It's wild to me. They just put it out. They're just, this will make money, and nobody's really thinking about how this is actually like, if millions or billions of people look at this thing and get information from it, like what information are we giving them? Is that responsible?
Well, I mean, the struggle there is that like, people's ability to misinterpret art is just shocking how good they are at it. And, I struggle to not try to over-psych myself about people trying to take things the wrong way. Because like you said, like somehow there are people who read X-Men and are bigots. And you're like, I don't know what,
right.
Like for all the problems with like everybody is thin and conventionally attractive and when they're not, they slowly draw them to be more and more so. For all of those problems, like it's still sort of like the text is telling you not to be a bigot, but yet somehow, so like people can read, Fight Club is hugely popular among like sexist men. And I'm like, look, you literally don't understand what this movie is about. Like my most viral tweet was me saying basically like Fight Club is feminist and most people don't understand that. And it blows my fucking mind. It happens on a mass scale and it's certain pieces of it are like, beyond our controlling, which is terrifying kind of.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. And that's 100%. And I definitely, in my work, am not really agonizing so much over how it's received. I think that it's just good to have an intention. Just in everyday life, everything I try to be more intentional with. But I think too that that's kind of a structural issue with a good versus evil dynamic, where you have like a victim and then a perpetrator of some kind, because people are always going to cast themselves as the victim, no matter what the subtext is.
So we've really learned. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that honestly, and I could go into good versus evil stuff forever and ever, but I don't like good versus evil stories. I think you have a really hard time trying to get people to understand that they're the bad guy in a situation if everyone is framed. If someone's framed as a good guy and a bad guy, no one's ever going to think they're the bad guy.
Is that what sort of appeals about the heist genre for this, or?
The heist stuff was more just, I thought it was fun. Genre is always like a playground for me to engage with like complex things that I'm still figuring out. A lot of the writing process for me is emotionally processing things or concepts that I can't understand, and so I just play with them, in this format, this structure, and it just helps me make sense of the universe and people, especially because we haven't really touched on neurodivergence stuff at all, but I've had to study people to understand them because I just don't, I'm not wired like most people are. So it's a great place for me to experiment with those things, but yeah, I think that the nuance just maybe comes in more on the mystery side of things, because so much of mystery is perception is not reality. And I really love that as a theme. And so, the mystery itself and the whodunit angle, I think really, really invites readers to think about characters and their roles in things and their decisions with more nuance. Because they're thinking about it and theorizing and trying to understand, motivations in a really more explicit way. And I think that it's a great way to get people to empathize, or give other kinds of people room in their brains
to have to think of empathy.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. So you mentioned something about talking about neurodiversity, and I've seen something in some people's sort of original character design type things where they feel like they have to specify like which specific diagnoses certain characters have. And it makes me want to like just scream because I don't like, I mean, the point of, as far as I'm concerned, as a person who's been in therapy for most of their life, the point of a diagnosis is to make insurance pay for your treatment. It's not like a specific label actually perfectly maps to a particular, like when we have Medicare for all and we have like a post-scarcity economy, like I just like these labels are to make insurance pay for your treatment. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
So I get where you're coming from, but you also have to understand that autistic people love to sort and label things, and I think that that's
True.
all that's going on. Is we want to have like bullet points for characters. We don't want to write, you know, like a ton of stuff. And I definitely have sheets of my characters that are full of bullet points that says, you know, Damascus is autistic, and here's how that manifests. But I'm just not showing it to anybody. I'm just demonstrating it through story instead. But yeah, I pretty much, like, for myself, have a rule that anyone who is not professionally creating comics, if they show me their OC, I'm not allowed to be mean about it or hate it in any way.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
true.
like,
I
you
mean,
put
yeah.
whatever pronouns you want on there, whatever diagnosis, your character is schizophrenic and it's not actually accurate, but that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good to have the pronouns so that I'm like using the right one and talking like that much. I definitely appreciate. And you actually had a good list of that for your characters when you sort of put out together the release.
Like, so I know it's not obvious. That's pointed out to me in the comments a lot that nobody can tell what gender anyone is. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, that's just me being like trans and bisexual.
Yes. But, I mean, just for me, it's sort of keep the pronouns on the sheet just because then I can refer to them properly. But yeah, but you get what I'm saying, though, on this. It's
absolutely. Like, and I do think that there's been this weird, the labels existed, like you said, to help accommodate, to be like, okay, so this person, their needs are not being met, and this is why. So, and then this is the needs that they need to have met. And that's the purpose of the diagnosis. But people, and not just neurodivergent people or people who are diagnosed with this stuff, but everybody seems to accept diagnoses as fact, as if this is just like a fact of nature that there's an autism brain and an allistic brain, and that they are totally different. And yes, you're going to see differences in brain activity because of just wiring, but there's not like a gene that makes that happen. It's not like a disease. It just is supposed to kind of help give you the tools to understand, your brain, because, we were lied about our brains for so long. We were told we're lazy or that we're weird. We are weird, but we're told all of these mean things about brains, which are totally fine. And so, a diagnosis should set somebody free. It should be a descriptor, not a definition.
I like it.
But also, autism is a huge part of my personality. I talk about it all the time, and I'm sure some people think I'm like being on the nose or whatever, but it's also like, I don't know. That's how things are.
Yeah, I mean, if it works for you, then it's an amazing tool. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's actually working, right?
Yeah. I will say that when I was first diagnosed, which was as an adult just a few years ago, that there was a period where I felt like totally hopeless, that so many of basically I felt that the problems that I had come in with to diagnose, because I was diagnosed now, I felt like that was telling me that these were not fixable in any way. And I think that for a lot of people, if they are, say, diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, a lot of them might just sit there, especially if they're depressed and already, feel hopeless. I think it's a totally natural response to sit there and be like, wow, I have an anxiety disorder. I'm going to be anxious all my life. And that's not true. If you don't have the resources to get better, then that's not going to happen. But it has, nothing to do with you and your brain and your ability, and everything to do with capitalism.
Yeah. And, I don't know. It's complicated, but.
Yeah, it is. And it's, sometimes I hesitate to talk about this stuff publicly because I'm not a doctor, but I have done a ton of research, and I've been in therapy and recovery for like 6 years now, so I know myself at least.
Well, it's one of the things I really appreciate about the younger generation is I'm part of the generation where a ton of people are getting help and a ton of people are getting therapy and treatment. But if you talk about it, you're going to experience workplace discrimination that will prevent you from being employable.
Yeah.
And that is still a problem, but not in the same way it used to be. So whenever I see young people talking about these things, my traumatized older person brain is like, you all are going to be discriminated against at work and no one will employ you. Which is, of course, also how I feel about people about talking about all kinds of things that in their lives. I'm like, oh my God, nobody will employ you. You're setting yourself up to not be able to have a job for completely bullshit reasons because I know you can completely handle this job. Oh my God, you're going to get discriminated against. It's going to ruin your life. But now I feel like, yeah, I can like talk about mental issues or whatever. And, I think part of it is like I am secure enough in my career that I don't actually worry about my employability anymore, to be honest.
Yeah.
When that is part of it is like getting older and more established, but also part of it is like, you young kids, you made it so that they can't just say we won't hire anybody with any mental things because all of you are out about it. So good luck hiring someone without it, motherfuckers. And that's true for so much like gender stuff and sexuality as well. Like you really made it easier for us to just not like be closeted about things when that's driven by specifically if, like, I think shame still keeps people quiet, but at least I'm not as worried about being seen as like unemployable if I acknowledge that I have these neurodivergences or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like we're in a really incredible time. This is paying decades of work paying off right now of activists, and it's just all suddenly poured into culture within the last 5 or 10 years that now there are like non-binary children everywhere.
I love them.
Yeah,
I'm so happy.
I'm like, whoa! I think the first time like a child or a teenager showed me they're like OC and they had pronouns and stuff on there, and the character was non-binary. I think I cried because I had never seen that before. That was like maybe 5 years ago, maybe longer now. COVID like sucked 2 years out of my entire lifetime,
Yes,
and they like didn't happen.
Yeah, and people express frustration with specific young queer parts of fandom that will do certain tendencies that older people, we might be like, please stop. But I am so thankful for them, guys. As an older queer person who's been out since like 1995 or 6 or something, I don't fucking know. I still get so much from intellectual work and emotional work and advocacy work being done by like really young kids in online spaces even. That has helped me understand myself, even though I was sitting there talking about like gender and sexuality in college before they were born. I've still benefited from them doing it. And just, I just need them to also, harass at people for other queers for doing quote unquote bad representation,
Oh, yeah.
But it's like, thank you guys for like sorting these things out. It's great.
I think those are two different groups of people. There's people who hop onto, cyberbully campaigns to harass queer people for not being perfect. And then there's groups of people, I think, who do more, advocacy work or just mind their own business.
But it's not just advocacy work though. Like it's a lot of it's a critical analysis too. Isn't, like I've seen stuff written by younger people or it's like, oh my God, I relate to that. That's crazy. I never put that together, even though I've been sitting with these things since before they were born. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty amazing because, I like to think I live a, pretty well-considered life, but it's like the kids still blow your mind and it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, they're incredible. I know that, people have issues with the teens, quote unquote. But I think by and large, like this is an incredibly powerful group of people, like, queer generation that we have brought up. And that, by and large, they're doing incredible things.
Yeah. I just want them to know that like old people, or at least me and my peers are very happy to be in dialogue with them. And
yeah, I'm very much like, I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I think a lot about, I don't know if you remember or if even we're party to, the Tumblr post in which a hive mind of young queer people invented the queer coffee shop. And I was like, I love this because it shows you how necessary this is, but also, guys, these literally existed. Can I tell you these basic things about queer history that you've been denied because our educational system is homophobic? Like, you have demonstrated the societal need for this thing to exist, but also let me show you like this picture that was taken with a camera of me in the 90s in front of a queer bookstore. Like, well, we called it a gay bookstore back then.
Yeah, that's our job as people who've been here for longer. The new people's job is to tell us the new information, and I'm not old, but the older people's job is to give them the old information.
Yes.
And that's really it, because they don't have, we say that, the internet gives you all this access to information, but if you don't know what to search for, you're not, that's not accessible, so they're not taught it. They don't have access to it. And it's up to us to, help them connect with the previous generations and build on the tools that we had.
And especially when they're told, like, certain things don't exist, why would they look for it, right?
Right.
I'm really sad that we haven't had in-person FlameCon for a few years, because that was always one of my favorite spaces for connecting with different generations of queer people.
I've actually never been.
Well, it is back in person this year, and I probably can't go because it's during my work's conference, which is like the one thing that I can't not be. So I'm like, God fucking damn it. But if obviously the state of play of COVID in society is constantly in flux. But if folks are in a space where they feel comfortable going to a thing in August, FlameCon is magical, at least for me. I know,
I've heard it's magical. Yeah.
I mean, everybody has different feedback about experiences about whatever. But, for me, I was like, there's so many queer people from different tending towards younger than me, but I've definitely seen people who are in their 60s as well, just not like as many.
Oh, right.
I know, right? And like one of them was like,
so
oh my God,
nice.
this is like this famous person, like famous graybeard, literally from fandom, like, from the 70s, who's here. It's amazing. To like be in one place and like in community with each other and like talk.
That's so neat. I love spaces like that.
So speaking of FlameCon, if you were going to develop a panel for FlameCon, the queer comics and queer geek media convention, that was an excuse for you to showcase Royale, what would that panel be?
I would be really interested, and I don't know if it would be like high level or not, but I'd be really interested to look at adapting genre, but like in a faithful, interesting way that doesn't rely on harmful stereotypes.
Ooh, yes.
If that makes sense. Because I'm thinking, for instance, and this is not a new concept, it's been floating around since Tumblr days, but the idea of like Indiana Jones, but not racist. And it really makes you think like how much racism is built into the format of those stories, going to exotic lands, dangers in those exotic lands. And it's like, there's really a lot in some of these genre stories that relies on really harmful, outdated stereotypes. I'm thinking also like Star Wars prequels, there's weird racism in that, among other things. Gender stuff, especially when you start to get into crime, spy stuff, and it's just sitting there, and it's in the foundation of the story and the tropes that you have to play with in order to make something that feels like that. But it's really, at least I have found it sort of challenging to navigate that in a way that I feel is constructive. Yeah.
That's a great point, because like you do get these stories, which for example, will be like, oh, we're going to do like an Indiana Jones type story, but in space. So it won't be racist. And you're like, yeah, but it actually still is, even though it's aliens,
Yes. Yeah. Cause we're relying on, when you're designing different peoples from different lands in fiction, humans can't make anything up. We can only reorganize information we already have. And so a lot of times we rely on stereotypes from, people that we've never met before. that we've just, seen through media or propaganda or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it's pretty meaty, and I don't know if it's something that people necessarily think of. I mean, like for example, in Royale, I mean, we have an antagonist that is a rich Asian woman, and that very, very easily, I think, without intention, could be very bad. But there are, really intentional directions that we're taking with it to subvert it. And I've been working with like a sensitivity reader and stuff to make sure we stick the landing. But like,
hooray!
Yeah, it's fun too. I have found it to be a really rewarding process to have not really a sensitivity reader, but a consultant like on the back end to kind of bounce ideas off of. Like, she's incredible. She's given me so much context for like why things are certain ways. Not just, oh, this is how to not make it offensive. It's more like, how do I make sure I'm understanding these things to make a compelling story, that paints this person as like a fully formed human being and not just an archetype I'm borrowing from somebody else's story.
But we're also both people who are like, yes, editors, please. So if you're the kind of person who understands that we create better when we have feedback from people, then the idea of sensitivity reader is good. Thank you. I want to see what you think. I want to make this better.
Yeah.
I want to learn from you,
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me. What's the best way for our listeners to keep up with your work and support your work?
So I am on Twitter most. I do have an Instagram, but it's, I don't super maintain it because I do so many comics that I can't really, post on Instagram because they're published somewhere. So I don't really post a lot there, but Twitter is great. I am Emmett Comics on there. That's EMMETTCOMIX. And I have a formal website, but whatever. That's not nobody cares about that. But everyone should read Royale on Webtoon because we didn't know it was launching, and so we didn't get to do any social media, and so we're like the lowest performing launch that week.
Yes, please, everybody go read it. And also with the way it's set up, you can read a lot of it for free. So like you'll be hooked before they ask you for money. So that's very affordable.
Yeah, and then please give us money.
And then give you money. Exactly. That's what I had. I got hooked and then I give them money. But it's like a great long sample. Like you'll know what you're in for and you can make like really great informed decision and be like, yes, I'm really fucking excited about this now. So
yep, I totally agree.
And it's I feel like in some ways it's a really good system for that. I mean, I want to get you as much money as humanly possible too, but
me too. More money.
Thanks for joining. And as always, this is Graphic Policy Radio. I am on Twitter a little too much at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Ilana_Brooklyn. We will continue to have more interviews with comics creators, as well as host some interesting conversations with fellow fans and organizers around comics adjacent media as these things show up on our screen. Also, I'll be back on Tighten Up the Defense. Did I even tell folks I was on it? I was on an earlier episode of Tighten Up the Defense podcast to talk about the very first issue of the Young Justice comic book series. Because when there's something that Peter David made, people supposedly want to talk with me about it now for some mystical reason. Anyway, so I was on to talk about that. It was a blast. I'm going to be back soon to talk about the issue of Batman where we get Tim Drake introduced, which will be interesting to do. So keep an eye out for me on Tighten Up the Defense too, and listen to it because it's hilarious. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.